So if we look back at late 2022, I mean, billions of dollars just vanished, basically overnight.
Yeah, literally evaporated.
Right, and we watched all these giants of the crypto industry just completely collapse, one after another, like dominoes. And, the most shocking part to me wasn't even the market volatility. It was the revelation that under the hood, these massive, supposedly sophisticated platforms were basically treating customer deposits like their own personal piggy banks.
Absolutely. I mean, they were making these wild leveraged bets with other people's money, operating with, well, basically non-existent risk controls.
Yeah, and when the music finally stopped, the retail customers were the ones left completely without a chair, just holding the bag.
Right, and the fallout from that was entirely systemic. I mean, it really exposed a fundamental flaw in how the entire industry had been operating up to that point. Because the prevailing ethos for years had been, just launch a protocol, attract billions in total value locked, and then, well, figure out the legal and compliance architecture later, if at all.
Exactly. Move fast and break things, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine for a photo sharing app, but maybe not for a global financial system.
Yeah, exactly. And regulators globally were just completely flat-footed. I mean, they were trying to use financial frameworks built for the 1930s to govern these digital assets that move at the speed of light. It just didn't work.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. Because while a lot of jurisdictions reacted to that whole contagion by either just ignoring the problem or indiscriminately throwing the book at literally any company that touched a blockchain, Dubai took a radically different path.
It really did. It's a completely unique approach.
Right. So we are looking at a huge stack of sources today detailing Law Number 4 of 2022. And this is the legislation that established a completely bespoke, custom-built regulator called the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, or VARA.
VARA.
Yeah, and they didn't just update some dusty old banking law. They designed a brand new architectural blueprint for Web3 from the ground up.
And our mission today is to basically tear that blueprint apart so you can see exactly how it works under the hood. So, if you are a founder trying to decide where to incorporate your next project, or an investor trying to understand if your assets are actually safe, or even just someone fascinated by how governments are, well, attempting to tame decentralized technology, this entire conversation is for you.
Because it's really the Wild West meeting the town sheriff.
Right. That's a great way to put it, yeah. Because the overarching philosophy here isn't to crush innovation. It's really to force that innovation onto very heavy, very clear regulatory tracks. So, the train doesn't derail and take the retail public down with it ever again.
I love that framing. But let's get specific right away. Who is VAR actually looking at? Like if I'm just sitting in my living room, day trading a little bit of Ethereum on my phone, do I need to worry about this regulator knocking on my door?
No, not at all. The individual retail trader is completely not the target of these rulebooks.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. VA's jurisdiction applies to any entity operating as a virtual asset service provider, or a VASP, within or from the Emirate of Dubai.
A VSE. Oh.
Right. And notably, this excludes the Dubai International Financial Center, the DIFC. They operate as their own distinct legal zone with a completely separate framework. But broadly speaking, in Dubai, if you are setting up an exchange, a brokerage, some sort of custody solution, or even issuing a brand new token, you are considered a VASP. You're the infrastructure provider, and therefore you fall directly under VA.
So if you want to build the actual infrastructure, you can't just set up a shell company in some tax haven, slap a .a domain on your website, and claim you're doing business in Dubai.
No, absolutely not. The licensing structure itself completely prevents that.
Because looking through the framework here, it's organized less like a single monolithic textbook and more like a highly structured restaurant menu.
Yeah, the modular approach, it's actually one of the...
Right, so there's the mandatory prefix selection and then an a la carte section depending on your specific business model. Break that down for us.
Sure. So regardless of what specific crypto service you provide, every single VASP must adopt 4 compulsory rulebooks. These are the absolute foundation.
The required courses.
Exactly. You have the company rulebook, the compliance and risk management rulebook, the technology and information rulebook, and the market conduct rulebook. Every single VASP eats those 4 courses, no exceptions.
And what about the a la carte section?
So those are the specific licenses for the distinct activities you actually want to perform because, the risk profile of a platform that just, say, matches buyers and sellers is very different from a platform that actually holds the private keys to $1 billion of customer funds.
Right. Totally different threat models.
Exactly. So VRI has these separate dedicated rule books for broker-dealer services, custody services, exchange services, lending and borrowing, management and investment, transfer and settlement, and finally, virtual asset issuance. You basically stack these licenses based on the exact scope of your operations.
Okay, so if I'm opening an exchange, I have to comply with the 4 mandatory modules
Yeah.
plus the exchange services module.
Yeah.
But if I also want to hold my users' crypto for them, which, basically most exchanges do, I have to go get the custody services license on top of that.
Right. And you have to demonstrate the specific technical and capital requirements for both of those activities simultaneously. They don't let you cut corners just because you're doing both.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So let's start digging into that foundation then, the company rulebook, because this really dictates the basic rules of existence for a VASP. And the very first hurdle here completely eliminates that anonymous, cloud-based startup model we see so often in crypto.
It does. It fundamentally changes how you incorporate.
Because the rulebook demands that a VASP must maintain a physical legal entity in the emirate, approved by a local commercial licensing authority.
Yeah, transparency of ownership is entirely non-negotiable for VARA. The whole system is built to prevent the use of those complex, nested offshore shell companies that are basically designed to obscure who is actually in charge.
Right, the Matryoshka doll of LLCs.
Exactly. The regulator demands a crystal clear line of sight to the ultimate beneficial owners, the UBOs.
Meaning they need to know the actual human beings who hold the controlling interests.
Right, the real people who are pulling the strings and absorbing the profits.
I want to push back on that a little bit, though, because, the defining innovation of Web3 over the last few years has been the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization.
Oh, absolutely. The DAO is central to this whole space.
Right. And a true DAO doesn't have a CEO. It doesn't have a board of directors. And it certainly doesn't have a central office in a skyscraper in Dubai. It's just a smart contract governed by, thousands of anonymous token holders voting on a blockchain. So how does a regulator pin a physical badge on a Discord server?
It's a great question.
Because the cypherpunk ethos would argue that DAOs are just fundamentally incompatible with this kind of local entity-based regulation.
You're hitting on the core tension of regulating Web3 right there. And VARA's approach here is actually fascinating because they do not ban DAOs, which is honestly a massive point in their favor.
Okay, so they allow them.
They do, but they explicitly refuse to let decentralization act as a shield against legal liability. If a VASP is going to utilize a DAO structure, they are forced by the regulator to build a legal bridge.
Huh. What does that bridge actually look like in practice?
Well, it basically means establishing a recognizable legal entity in Dubai, so perhaps a foundation or a specialized LLC. And that entity acts as the official VASP and holds the actual license.
Okay, so a physical anchor for the decentralized cloud.
Exactly. And when they apply for that license, the founders must furnish this deeply detailed explanation of the relationship between that physical legal entity and the decentralized DAO. The really critical part is operational control.
What do you mean?
The VASP has to prove to VAR that if the regulator issues a binding directive, so, for instance, an emergency order to freeze a wallet associated with international terrorism, the VASP has the technical capacity to execute that freeze immediately.
Wait. But if the protocol is governed by a community vote, and, a freeze takes a week to pass a governance proposal, the money is already long gone.
Which is exactly why VAR requires a bypass mechanism.
Wow.
Yeah, the VASP must demonstrate that compliance decisions can be executed regardless of the decentralized voting process. So practically, this usually involves implementing an emergency multi-signature wallet controlled by the legal entity, or maybe a time-lock bypass that allows the licensed VASP to just override the protocol and strictly define regulatory emergencies.
Oh, wow. The purists in the crypto space are going to absolutely hate that.
They do.
That is essentially mandating a backdoor for the regulator.
Well, it's a backdoor for legal compliance, right? VARA is making a very clear statement here. If you want the legitimacy of operating in Dubai, you cannot crowdsource your legal accountability. If the law is broken, someone human must answer for it.
Speaking of answering for it, let's talk about the people at the top of these companies. The company rulebook spends a lot of time on the board of directors. And in traditional startups, board seats are often just kind of handed out to early venture capital investors as a perk.
Right, the money guys.
Yeah, but VRA requires every single board member to be assessed and approved as a fit and proper person, and they do this annually.
And it goes way beyond just a standard criminal background check. There are mandatory ongoing training requirements.
Wait, the board members have to go to class?
Essentially, yes. Board members must be educated on corporate governance, the financial intricacies of the specific business, and most importantly, the specific systemic risks of the global virtual asset sector.
So you can't just put, like, a retired traditional banking executive on the board and assume their knowledge perfectly translates.
Yeah. No, definitely not. They have to actually understand smart contract vulnerabilities, liquidity cascading risks, and, blockchain-specific threat vectors.
Okay, having an educated board is great, obviously, but boards only really meet a few times a year. Who is on the ground making sure the company doesn't blow up on a random Tuesday? Because this brings us to a requirement that feels totally unique to this framework: the mandate for two responsible individuals.
Ah, yes. This is perhaps the heaviest operational burden for a new VASP setting up in Dubai.
Really? Why is that?
Well, the VASP is required to appoint two specific named individuals of sufficient seniority who bear the personal day-to-day responsibility for the company's compliance with all VARA regulations.
And looking at the constraints on who these two people can be, it's incredibly tight. Like, they can't just be outside consultants.
No, they must be full-time employees.
And crucially, they must be actual residents of the UAE or hold a UAE passport.
Yes. And this completely eliminates the whole remote control business model. A founder can't just sit in a beach house in the Caribbean running an exchange while outsourcing their compliance to some firm in London, all while claiming to be a Dubai-regulated entity.
Right.
VARA is demanding local skin in the game. You must have two senior captains physically present in the jurisdiction. Because if something goes catastrophically wrong, VARA wants to know exactly who to call, and they want those individuals to be subject to local legal authority.
I can imagine this creates a massive talent war in Dubai. I mean, finding executive-level crypto compliance experts who are willing to move to the UAE and take on that level of personal legal risk, that cannot be cheap for these startups.
It is a massive barrier to entry by design. It really acts as a filter. If your project doesn't have the capital to recruit and relocate top-tier compliance talent, well, VAR's perspective is you aren't ready to handle millions of dollars of the public's money.
That makes sense.
And furthermore, if one of these responsible individuals resigns unexpectedly, the VASP has to notify the regulator immediately. There can be absolutely no gap in local accountability.
Wow. And you can't just pass the blame to a vendor either, right? Because a lot of crypto platforms rely heavily on third-party software, like blockchain analytics tools for tracing funds or external KYC providers to verify passports.
Right. The tech stack is very decentralized itself.
Exactly. But the rules on outsourcing here are very explicit. You can outsource the function, but you cannot outsource the accountability.
The buck stops entirely with the VASP. Always. If an exchange, say, hires a third-party service to run identity verification, and that service suffers a glitch that allows a group of sanctioned individuals to open trading accounts.
Which happens.
It happens all the time. But VAR is going to hold the VASP responsible exactly as if their own internal employees had failed. So the VASP must conduct intense due diligence on their vendors and continuously monitor their performance.
Okay, so we've built the corporate fortress. We've got our local captains physically installed in Dubai.
Yeah.
Now let's move to the second compulsory module, which really governs the actual movement of money, the Compliance and Risk Management Rulebook.
Yes, the AML and CFT section.
Right. Anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism.
This is really the frontline defense against the financial system being weaponized by bad actors. So VAR mandates a highly robust compliance management system, and it has to be overseen by a money laundering reporting officer or an MLRO.
They have specific requirements for that person too, right?
Very specific. This individual must possess a minimum of 2 years of direct experience in AML and CFT matters. And their job is, frankly, relentless.
What does their day-to-day actually look like?
They conduct business-wide risk assessments, they monitor transactions in real time, they file suspicious activity reports, and they have to present quarterly deep dives to the board of directors on the effectiveness of the platform's defenses.
Okay, let's talk about how they actually monitor those transactions. Because this is where the friction between the pseudo-anonymous nature of blockchain and traditional finance becomes very, very real. The rulebook strictly enforces something called the travel rule. For anyone who isn't deep in the compliance weeds, let's break down how this actually works.
Sure. So the travel rule originated with the Financial Action Task Force, which is the global money laundering and terrorist financing watchdog. It was initially designed for international wire transfers between traditional legacy banks.
Swift transfers, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But VA has adopted it and mandated it for virtual assets. And the core concept is pretty simple. The metadata about who is sending and receiving money must literally travel alongside the transaction itself.
And there's a specific financial trigger for this to kick in.
Yes, the threshold is set at an equivalent value exceeding 3,500 UAE dirhams, which hovers right around 1,000 US dollars.
Okay.
If a transaction exceeds that amount, the sending VASP must securely transmit the originator's information, so their name, their account or wallet address, and their physical residential or business address directly to the receiving VASP.
And the receiving VSP has to collect the beneficiary's name and wallet address. So if I'm moving, say, $1,000 of Bitcoin from one regulated exchange to another, those two corporate entities literally have to talk to each other through a secure back-end channel and handshake on my identity before the funds are actually released to me.
That is exactly how it works.
Okay, I understand how that works institution to institution. But crypto is unique because it allows me to self-custody. What happens if I want to withdraw my Bitcoin to an unhosted wallet, like a Ledger or a Trezor sitting on my physical desk in my office? My hardware wallet doesn't have a compliance department to receive that travel rule data.
And this has been a massive point of contention globally. I mean, some jurisdictions flirted with the idea of banning transfers to unhosted wallets entirely.
Which would kind of defeat the purpose of crypto.
It absolutely would. So VARA takes a more nuanced, risk-based approach here.
Yeah.
They don't prohibit interactions with non-obliged entities, which is just the compliance term for your personal hardware wallet, but they place a very heavy burden of proof on the VASP.
How so? Is it like a customs agent checking a passport at the border?
That's actually a perfect metaphor. The VASP acts exactly as the border control. Before they allow assets to leave their platform and enter an unhosted wallet, or, conversely, before they accept an incoming deposit from one, they must deploy sophisticated blockchain analytics software.
To do what?
They trace the transaction history of that specific unhosted wallet address. They are actively looking for taint.
Taint?
Yeah, so they're asking, has this wallet previously interacted with a known darknet market? Has it received funds from a decentralized mixer, like, say, Tornado Cash?
Oh, I see.
If the analytics flag the wallet as high risk, the VASP's automated systems must halt the transaction immediately, escalate it to the MLRO, and potentially freeze the assets pending further investigation.
So they treat the public ledger exactly like what it is, a permanent public record of every single transaction.
Exactly.
But this reliance on tracing brings us to a major conflict point with certain types of assets, specifically anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrencies.
Ah, yes. The privacy coins.
Right, privacy coins like Monero or Zcash. These are protocols engineered specifically to scramble their transaction graphs so that analytics software literally cannot trace the sender, the receiver, or the amount. It breaks the tracing.
And because they break the VASP's ability to act as that customs agent we just talked about, VASP treats them with extreme prejudice.
They ban them.
Well, the issuance of any anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrency is completely prohibited in Dubai. You absolutely cannot launch a privacy coin under this framework, period.
But wait, privacy advocates argue that financial privacy is a fundamental human right. I mean, I don't want the whole world knowing how much I spend on coffee or...
Yes. If you trade Monero on a Dubai exchange, expect the compliance department to audit your entire financial life twice a year.
Wow.
Furthermore, the rules clearly state that if the AML risks cannot be adequately mitigated, the VASP is legally obligated to drop the product entirely. So this subtext is very clear. Handling privacy coins is an immense liability, and VAO would prefer you just didn't.
Okay, let's pivot from protecting the state against money laundering to protecting the actual consumer from the platform itself. Because, let's be honest, in the wake of the 2022 collapses, this is what everyone actually cares about.
Oh, 100%.
So Section V of the Compliance Rulebook covers client virtual assets rules. And reading through this, it feels like it was written directly in response to the collapse of FTX and Celsius.
It absolutely was. I mean, the core tragedy of those bankruptcies was that retail users didn't realize they had essentially handed legal ownership of their assets over to the exchanges.
Right, because when you deposit cash into a traditional bank, legally, you are giving the bank an unsecured loan.
Yeah.
The cash becomes the bank's asset, and they just owe you a liability on a ledger.
Exactly. And if the bank fails, you are stuck in the back of the line with all the other general creditors just hoping to recover pennies on the dollar, assuming, of course, that deposit insurance doesn't cover you.
Right. And crypto platforms were basically operating under that exact same legal assumption, but without any of the fractional reserve regulations or government insurance safeguards that traditional banks have.
Which is a recipe for disaster. But VA completely rewrites that legal relationship for virtual assets. The rulebook explicitly states, and this is huge, client VAs are not depository liabilities or assets of the VASP.
Wow.
Yeah. It goes on to declare that client funds shall not form part of the VASP's estate in the event of insolvency.
This is a monumental shift in property rights.
It really is. It means if you deposit one Bitcoin onto a VAA-regulated exchange, the exchange is acting strictly as a bailee. They are just holding it in trust for you. It is not their Bitcoin.
It doesn't sit on their corporate balance sheet.
Exactly. So if the exchange's parent company takes on massive debt, makes terrible venture capital investments, and goes completely bankrupt, the liquidators have absolutely no legal claim to your Bitcoin to pay off those corporate creditors.
But the legal distinction only works if the assets are physically separated in the database, right? Because during some of those previous bankruptcies, the internal databases said users held billions, but when auditors looked at the actual blockchain wallets, the money just wasn't there. It had been commingled and spent.
Right. To prevent exactly that, VAR mandates physical cryptographic separation. Client virtual assets must be held in dedicated wallets that are explicitly labeled in the VASP's internal systems as client VA wallets.
So no mixing funds.
None. Commingling client funds with the VASP's operational treasury is considered a severe, severe violation.
And what about the actual backing? Because fractional reserve banking allows legacy banks to lend out a large portion of deposits. Can a crypto exchange do that here?
No. Rule VA4 requires that client virtual assets must be held on a strict one-to-one basis.
Full reserve.
Full reserve. For every single Bitcoin a user sees on their app dashboard, there must be a real Bitcoin sitting in the designated client wallet on the actual blockchain.
Okay, this leads perfectly into the concept of rehypothecation. We really need to explore this because it's the exact mechanism that destroyed so much wealth in the last cycle.
Yeah, rehypothecation is the silent killer.
Right. So rehypothecation is when a platform takes your deposited asset and pledges it as collateral somewhere else, usually to generate a yield. So they take your Bitcoin, lend it to a high-frequency trading firm. The trading firm pays the exchange, say, 5% interest, and maybe the exchange passes 2% along to you.
If you're lucky. VARA strictly prohibits a VASP from authorizing or permitting the rehypothecation of client assets without explicit prior discretionary consent from the client.
Meaning you can't just hide a clause on page 50 of the terms of service that says, hey, we can gamble with your deposits.
Exactly. The consent must be incredibly explicit. And even if the user explicitly consents because they actively want to earn that yield, the VASP cannot just quietly execute these loans on their own.
They can't.
No, they must hold a specific separate VARA license for lending and borrowing services or management services, which subjects them to an entirely different, much stricter tier of risk capital requirements.
So the default state under VARA is that my assets sit perfectly still.
Exactly.
Okay, but what happens if the blockchain itself generates a return? Let's say I'm holding a token and the developers of that protocol do an airdrop. They distribute free, newly minted tokens to all existing holders. Or what if the network transitions to proof of stake and my dormant Ethereum is technically eligible for staking rewards?
Yeah.
Who gets the free money in that scenario? The exchange.
The framework addresses this directly, actually. Any proceeds or benefits related to client virtual assets, and that explicitly includes airdrops, staking rewards, or protocol forks, accrue entirely to the benefit of the client. Yeah, the VASP cannot skim these windfalls unless they have obtained explicit prior consent to take an administrative fee. It's your money, your yield.
Okay, this level of segregation and one-to-one backing is, frankly, incredible for consumer protection. But implementing these systems is wildly expensive and complex.
Extremely.
So if I'm a brilliant developer with a great idea for a new decentralized exchange protocol, but I don't have $20 million in venture funding to hire MLROs and build compliant multi-sig wallets, am I just locked out of Dubai entirely?
Not necessarily. VAA actually anticipated this and created a very pragmatic mechanism called sponsored VASPs.
Sponsored VASPs, how does that work?
It operates essentially like an umbrella system.
Yeah.
You can have a massively capitalized, fully regulated entity, say, a massive global exchange that already has a fortress of compliance infrastructure built out. VAR allows that large entity to act as a regulated sponsor for smaller, emerging VASPs.
So the big player basically adopts the startup.
Correct. The regulated sponsor formally takes on the burden of ensuring the smaller entity's compliance. Yeah, the sponsor conducts deep due diligence on the startup, ensures they have the right technology, and actively oversees their regulatory obligations.
But what's the catch?
The catch is liability. If the small VASP fails to file a suspicious activity report or breaches market conduct rules, VAR holds the massive regulated sponsor legally liable.
Oh, so the sponsor is really putting their neck on the line.
Absolutely. But it's an elegant way to allow scrappy startups to enter the market and innovate without forcing the regulator to lower their incredibly strict standards. The risk is just absorbed by the well-resourced sponsor.
That is a fascinating dynamic. It essentially incentivizes the big platforms to act as incubators for the ecosystem.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked a lot about compliance teams and legal structures, but the foundation of crypto isn't lawyers, it's code. If the code has a bug, all the legal firewalls in the world won't stop a hacker from draining the protocol.
Very true.
This brings us to the third mandatory rulebook, technology and information. How does VARA actually regulate a highly technical, constantly evolving software environment?
They regulate it by assuming that catastrophe is inevitable and forcing VASPs to engineer around it.
Assume breach.
Exactly. The overarching mandate is the implementation of a comprehensive technology governance and risk assessment framework. This means designing systems with zero tolerance for single points of failure, particularly regarding cryptographic keys.
Right, because in crypto, the private key is everything. It is the literal bearer instrument.
Yeah.
If you possess the string of alphanumeric characters that makes up the private key, you completely control the asset.
There is no password reset button.
Right. There is no customer service hotline to call if you lose it or someone steals it.
Which is exactly why VAR prohibits any architecture where a single individual possesses the information necessary to unilaterally conduct a transaction or access the overarching treasury.
Meaning one guy can't have the master password.
Right. We've seen tragic cases in the past where a single founder died suddenly, taking the sole knowledge of the private keys to his grave and permanently locking away hundreds of millions of dollars of customer funds.
I remember that.
Yeah, VARA makes that architecture completely illegal.
So they have to use multi-signature wallets or multi-party computation.
Yeah.
You essentially break the key into pieces and require a quorum, say, 3 out of 5 executives, to mathematically sign a transaction before it can actually execute.
Yes, and the physical distribution of those key shards must be geographically and operationally separated. You can't all be in the same room. But the rulebook goes even further into the life cycle of those keys. What happens when one of those 5 executives quits or gets terminated?
Well, you can't just revoke their corporate email access and assume the funds are safe.
Yeah.
Right, because they might have memorized their key shard or written it on a piece of paper.
Exactly. VAI requires that VASPs maintain granular, immutable access logs detailing every single interaction with key material. If a staff member with signatory access departs, the VASP must immediately conduct a security assessment to determine if their key slice has been compromised.
And what if they think it might be?
In many cases, standard procedure requires them to completely generate a new key generation ceremony, transfer all the funds to the new architecture, and burn the old locks entirely just to guarantee that a parted employee retains zero latent access.
Wow.
Yeah, and these logs and access controls must be internally audited every single quarter.
Okay, so they are protected from a rogue employee. But what about external threats? I mean, the crypto industry is constantly under siege by some of the most sophisticated cyber syndicates on Earth. State-sponsored hackers from North Korea have stolen billions by exploiting tiny flaws in smart contract logic. How does VAR force these platforms to harden their defenses against that?
Through relentless, mandatory third-party testing, a VASP cannot just rely on their internal engineering team to spot vulnerabilities. They must engage qualified, independent cybersecurity auditors to conduct full penetration testing at least annually. And crucially, prior to the deployment of any major new system update.
And what about the smart contracts themselves? Because if an exchange integrates a new decentralized finance protocol to offer yield to their users, they are exposing their users to the code of that protocol.
VARA specifically mandates comprehensive audits of the effectiveness, enforceability, and robustness of all smart contracts prior to their use. The code must be independently verified to ensure there are no reentrancy vulnerabilities, no infinite minting bugs, no logical loopholes that a hacker could exploit to drain the liquidity pools.
But the most intense requirement in this section, and the one that really shows how advanced this framework is something called threat-led penetration testing, or TLPT. Break this down for us because it sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It essentially is. I love this part. VAR recognizes that traditional automated vulnerability scanners are basically insufficient against advanced persistent threats. So the regulator retains the power to mandate that specific VASPs, likely the largest ones handling systemically important volumes, undergo TLPT.
What does that actually mean?
This isn't a simple software scheme. This involves hiring elite, certified, ethical hacking firms to act as a red team.
So they literally pay these hackers to actively attack the live company.
Yes. They are simulating the exact tactics, techniques, and procedures used by real-world cyber syndicates.
Give me an example.
So a threat-led test might involve the red team looking up the VASP's lead developer on LinkedIn, finding out what coffee shop they frequent, spoofing the public Wi-Fi network there, and attempting to inject a malicious payload into the developer's laptop to gain a foothold into the corporate network.
Wow.
And from there, they try to pivot to the key generation infrastructure.
So they're testing the human element just as much as the code.
Exactly. It's a live fire exercise. And these red teams must be certified by recognized international accreditation bodies. After the engagement, they submit a comprehensive independent assurance report directly to VAO, detailing exactly how long it took to breach the defenses, what data they compromised, and how the VASP's internal blue team responded to the intrusion.
That is wild. The idea of the regulator mandating live-fire social engineering attacks on an exchange, that is just next-level security. It really forces a level of operational security that is normally reserved for, like, central banks or military contractors.
It does. It raises the bar for everyone.
Let's shift gears now from the technology back to the humans. The fourth compulsory rulebook, market conduct. This governs how the VASP interacts with the public, how they market their products, and how they handle conflicts of interest. To understand this, we really first need to understand how VAA classifies the public, because they don't treat all investors equally, do they?
No, and client categorization is a fundamental tenet of traditional financial regulation that VA has smartly imported. The level of disclosure required and the types of high-risk products a VAP is allowed to offer depend entirely on the sophistication of the client they're actually dealing with.
Okay, so what are the categories?
VAS establishes three primary tiers: retail investors, qualified investors, and institutional investors.
Retail is obviously the default, right? The average person off the street downloading an app to buy a fraction of a Bitcoin.
Yes, and retail investors are afforded the absolute highest level of consumer protection. A VASP must provide them with exhaustive risk disclosures, very clear fee structures, and is generally restricted from offering them highly complex or highly leveraged derivatives without massive, strict guardrails.
Makes sense. So who falls into the qualified investor bucket?
This requires passing a financial threshold. An individual must demonstrate that they possess unencumbered net liquid assets of at least 500,000 UAE dirhams.
Which is roughly 135,000 US dollars.
Right. And the regulatory logic here is that if you have accumulated that level of liquid wealth, you possess a higher degree of financial sophistication, and more importantly, you have the financial capacity to absorb potential losses without facing absolute ruin.
Therefore, you are allowed to access riskier products, like margin trading or complex structured products.
Exactly.
And institutional investors are just other regulated corporate entities, banks, and governments.
Correct. Now, regardless of the client category, there is one rule within the market conduct framework that I consider the absolute linchpin of fairness.
What's that?
It addresses perhaps the most egregious conflict of interest we saw during the 2022 market crashes. It is the strict prohibition on proprietary trading.
Oh, let's dig deep into this. Because this is where crypto exchanges radically departed from traditional financial models. I mean, in traditional equities, the New York Stock Exchange is just a matching engine. It matches a buyer with a seller, takes a microscopic fee, and doesn't care if the price of the stock goes up or down.
They're neutral.
Right. But crypto exchanges evolved to do literally everything. They were the broker, the matching engine, the clearinghouse, and the custodian all rolled into one.
And critically, many of them also operated massive internal trading desks. They were actively trading for the company's own profit on their own platform.
Which is an insane conflict of interest. Because if you are the exchange, you own the database. You can see exactly where every single retail customer has placed their liquidation orders. You know exactly what price level will trigger a cascade of automated sell-offs.
It's the equivalent of playing poker at a casino where the dealer isn't just dealing the cards. The dealer can see your hand, the dealer controls the deck, and the dealer is actively betting their own money against you.
It's totally rigged.
It is. It allowed platforms to intentionally manipulate market prices in the short term to hunt customer stop losses, basically liquidating retail users to generate massive profits for the exchange's own proprietary trading desk.
And VAR explicitly bans this behavior. The rule states that VASPs are prohibited from actively investing their own portfolio or their corporate group's portfolio of virtual assets.
Yes. The exchange absolutely cannot bet against its own players.
Are there any exceptions?
Well, they are allowed to conduct prudent treasury management. A VASP can manage its corporate balance sheet to pay expenses or convert fee revenue into stable assets, but they cannot engage in high-frequency, speculative trading to generate profit. And VARA retains the sole discretion to audit their trading volumes to determine if they cross the line from treasury management into illegal proprietary trading.
Okay, so the casino can't bet against me. But how do we ensure the chips we are playing with aren't completely rigged? I mean, there are currently over 2 million different crypto tokens in existence. Anyone can deploy a smart contract in 5 minutes and create a new coin.
Yeah, and a vast majority of them are outright scams or have zero economic utility.
Right. So can a VARA-regulated exchange just list any token that happens to be trending on social media?
Absolutely not. The VA standards section of the rulebook strictly governs the listing process. Before a VASP can offer any services related to a specific token, whether that's listing it for trading or even just offering custody services for it, they must perform rigorous due diligence. They basically become the gatekeepers.
What exactly are they analyzing during this due diligence?
Well, they have to assess the technological design and the practical use case of the token. They must review its regulatory history. So, has it been classified as an unregistered security by the SEC in the United States? Has it been associated with illicit financing? But most importantly, they must conduct a deep dive into the tokenomics.
Tokenomics being the economic model baked directly into the code.
Yes. The VASP has to evaluate the circulating supply versus the fully diluted valuation. They must analyze the concentration of ownership.
To look for whales.
Exactly. If the due diligence reveals that, say, 85% of a token supply is held by 3 anonymous developer wallets, that asset is incredibly vulnerable to a rug pull or massive price manipulation. The VASP cannot list it.
Wow.
Furthermore, they must ensure the underlying smart contracts of that specific token have been independently audited.
And this isn't just a hurdle they jump over once, right? Like once it's listed, are they done?
No, it's an ongoing obligation. The VASP must continuously monitor the tokens they support. If a decentralized protocol passes a governance vote that radically alters its tokenomics, or if a major vulnerability is discovered in its code, the VASP must have procedures in place to immediately suspend trading and protect their users.
And what happens when a user does face an issue? Say a deposit gets stuck or they suspect a fee was calculated incorrectly. Historically, customer service in the crypto industry has been notoriously abysmal.
Abysmal is being kind.
Seriously.
Right.
It was so common to submit a support ticket and hear absolutely nothing for 3 months, only to eventually get an automated response that didn't even solve the problem.
VARA regulates customer service just as strictly as they regulate capital.
Really?
Yes, the rulebook demands effective, transparent procedures for the prompt and fair handling of all complaints. A VASP must provide an easily accessible template for submitting issues directly on their platform.
And they enforce strict timelines, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading here, the VASP must officially acknowledge the complaint and provide a status update within 4 weeks.
Correct. And they are legally mandated to reach a final resolution no later than 8 weeks from the date of submission.
Maximum 8 weeks.
Maximum. And there is a critical consumer protection clause here. Rule 3A4 explicitly dictates that VASPs shall not impose any fees or charges for the submission or handling of any complaints.
Oh, so you can't charge a frustrated customer a processing fee just to review their broken transaction.
Exactly. It has to be free. Furthermore, the VASP can't just treat these complaints in isolation. They are actually required to analyze the aggregate data to identify systemic root causes.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, so if thousands of users are complaining about the exact same withdrawal delay, the VASP must identify the operational bottleneck and fix the underlying issue, and they must regularly report these complaint metrics directly to VAR. The regulator actually uses this data as an early warning system, so a sudden spike in unresolved complaints might trigger an unannounced regulatory audit.
All right, so we've covered the corporate structure, the compliance firewalls, the technology testing, and the market conduct rules. Let's move into the financial plumbing, the capital and financial requirements.
This is where it gets very real.
Because all this compliance, overhead, the resident officers, the elite red team hackers, the independent auditors, this is incredibly expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
How does VARA ensure these companies actually have the money to survive a protracted crypto winter?
Yeah.
Because revenues in this industry fluctuate wildly.
They do, and this is outlined in the Prudential Requirements section of the company Rulebook. VAR mandates a strict financial buffer designed specifically to absorb extreme market shocks. And this buffer consists of three distinct components: paid-up capital, net liquid assets, and reserve assets.
Break those down for us. Paid-up capital is essentially the bedrock, right?
Yes, paid-up capital is the actual hard money that shareholders have permanently invested into the corporate entity. It sits there as a foundational safety net, proving that the founders are sufficiently capitalized. And the required amount scales up based on the specific licenses the VASP holds.
And net liquid assets.
This is a liquidity requirement. A VASP must hold a specific ratio of assets that can be rapidly converted into cash without significant loss of value.
So not locked up in obscure altcoins.
Exactly. It ensures they can meet their short-term operational liabilities, like paying their server costs, their employees, and their compliance vendors, even if their trading revenue drops to literally zero during a severe bear market.
And reserve assets we will touch on in a moment because those specifically relate to stablecoins. But beyond just hoarding cash, there is a fascinating requirement regarding insurance. VASPs are mandated to hold highly specialized insurance policies.
This is one of the most innovative parts of the framework.
They need professional indemnity insurance to cover negligence by their staff and directors and officers insurance to protect the board from liability. But the most striking requirement is for commercial crime insurance, specifically covering virtual assets held in hot wallets.
Yes. This is a phenomenal risk mitigation strategy, but to understand it, we really need to clarify the difference between hot and cold wallets for a second.
Go for it.
So, a cold wallet is entirely disconnected from the internet. It's the digital equivalent of a physical vault buried underground. It is highly secure against remote hacking, but it is very slow to access. A hot wallet, however, is constantly connected to the internet. It is absolutely necessary for operational liquidity. It processes the minute-by-minute deposits and withdrawals for the active users.
So the hot wallet is basically the cash register sitting out on the counter. It has to be open to do business, but it's the most vulnerable target for a robbery.
That is the perfect analogy. Because hot wallets are online, they are the primary targets for cyber syndicates. VARA explicitly recognizes this vulnerability and requires the VASP to obtain commercial crime insurance, specifically covering the total value of the assets stored in that hot wallet environment.
Which brings up a huge practical issue. I mean, I can imagine that going to a traditional underwriter at Lloyd's of London and asking for a $50 million insurance policy against North Korean hackers stealing your internet money that has to be nearly impossible to secure, at least astronomically expensive.
It is incredibly expensive, yes. And more importantly, it requires the VASP to open up their entire technological architecture to the insurance underwriters for auditing.
Oh.
Yeah, if the underwriter deems your key management sloppy, they simply won't issue the policy. And without the policy, you lose your VARA license. So the insurance requirement effectively acts as a secondary, market-driven layer of security auditing. The insurance market itself enforces the technical rigor.
That is brilliant. They outsource a layer of auditing to the actuary.
Exactly.
Now, what happens if a VASP suffers a severe financial blow? Let's say a major venture capital backer pulls out, or market revenues plummet, and the VASP's balance sheet dips below these mandatory capital thresholds. Can they just, quietly try to earn their way back to solvency over the next few quarters without telling anyone?
Absolutely not. The deficit reporting rules are draconian. If a VSP breaches any of the required capital, liquidity, or insurance thresholds, they must notify VAR immediately.
Define immediately in this context.
Within one single calendar day.
24 hours. That is intense.
It is designed to prevent the zombie company scenario we've seen so many times. That notification must detail the exact amount of the deficit, the root cause of the failure, the specific remedial actions the VASP is implementing, and a timeline for rectification.
And then what?
Well, it doesn't end with a single email. The rules mandate that the VASP must provide updated reports to VARA on a daily basis until the regulator is fully satisfied that the financial health of the firm has been completely restored.
Daily check-ins with the regulator. Good morning, VAR. Still short $5 million. Currently trying to secure a bridge loan.
Basically.
That level of scrutiny really forces the executive team to prioritize capitalization above literally all other operational goals.
Exactly. It prevents founders from hiding insolvency while continuing to accept new customer deposits.
Let's talk about a specific type of asset that has its own incredibly strict set of financial rules. Stablecoins. In the VAR terminology, these are categorized as fiat-referenced virtual assets, or FRVAs. These are tokens designed to maintain a one-to-one peg with the traditional fiat currency, like the US dollar. Tether and USDC are the famous examples here. Why does VAR treat these so differently than a normal crypto token?
Because issuing a stablecoin is fundamentally different from launching a utility token. When you issue a stablecoin, you are essentially engaging in private money creation. You are building payment infrastructure. The systemic risk is immense. If a major stablecoin loses its peg, if people realize that the token is not actually backed by real dollars in a bank, it can trigger a catastrophic run on the bank that wipes out billions in value across the entire crypto ecosystem.
So issuing an FRVA requires a dedicated, specific Category 1 VA issuance license. Every single stablecoin must be pre-approved. But before we get into the capital rules, I want to clarify a fascinating jurisdictional boundary I noticed in the sources. The rules explicitly state that VAI will not approve the issuance of any stablecoin that purports to maintain a stable value tied to the UAE dirham.
Yes, that is a critical point of national financial sovereignty.
Oh, so?
VAR regulates virtual assets, but the central bank of the UAE regulates the sovereign currency. Any digital asset designed to act as a proxy for the dirham falls under the exclusive jurisdiction of the central bank. VARA's mandate strictly covers stablecoins pegged to foreign currencies, like the US dollar or the euro.
Okay, so if I want to launch a new, fully compliant US dollar stablecoin out of Dubai, what are the capital requirements? Reading the formula here, it seems staggeringly high.
It is intentionally designed to ensure only deeply capitalized, highly serious entities can enter this market. First, you must hold the reserve assets. Meaning, for every digital dollar token you mint and sell, you must have a real US dollar sitting in a highly secure, bankruptcy-remote traditional bank account. That is the basic one-to-one backing.
Okay.
But on top of that, the VASP itself must maintain a massive operational capital buffer.
Right. The rulebook says the VASP must maintain paid-up capital equal to 1.5 million dirhams plus 2% of the value of the available circulating supply of the stablecoin. Let's do the math on that because it scales infinitely.
Let's walk through it. It's huge. If your stablecoin is successful and scales to a $10 billion market capitalization, you hold $10 billion in the reserve bank accounts. But your corporate entity, the VASP, must also hold 2% of that $10 billion as its own operational capital.
2% of $10 billion is $200 million.
Correct. You need $200 million in dead capital. It cannot be deployed for venture investments. It cannot be paid out as dividends. It just sits there as an insurance policy against your own operational failure.
That is a massive drag on capital efficiency. I mean, most crypto projects are used to hyper-efficient capital structures where literally every dollar is earning yield somewhere.
Which is exactly why VAR instituted the rule. It deliberately weeds out the reckless operators. It ensures that the issuer has enough real skin in the game to manage the complex, high-risk infrastructure of a globally traded payment token.
Wow.
Furthermore, the marketing rules surrounding these stablecoins are incredibly strict. You absolutely cannot run advertisements implying that your token is equivalent to a government-insured bank deposit.
So no safe as houses marketing?
None. You must include explicit disclaimers that holders have the right to redeem the token at par, but that the asset is absolutely not covered by any national deposit guarantee scheme. Transparency over marketing spin.
Always. All right, we have spent nearly an hour painting a picture of an incredibly fortified, heavily guarded castle. We've laid out the tracks, the signaling systems, and the safety nets. But what happens when a train decides to speed or jumps the tracks entirely? Let's talk about enforcement and penalties. Does VR actually have teeth, or is this just a lot of paperwork?
Oh, VR has sweeping, draconian enforcement powers that are woven into the very fabric of every rulebook we've discussed today. They are not a passive observer. They possess absolute discretion to intervene directly in a VASP's operations.
Beyond just levying heavy financial fines.
Fines are just the starting point. VARA can unilaterally suspend or completely revoke a VASP's license, effectively shutting down their ability to operate in the region overnight. But they can also execute very surgical interventions.
Like what?
Well, under the exchange services rules, if VIA detects market manipulation or systemic instability, they can instruct an exchange to immediately halt trading on a specific token.
What if they catch a massive hedge fund using an exchange to manipulate prices through highly leveraged positions?
VARA has the authority to order the exchange to forcibly close out or liquidate specific client positions. They can mandate the severing of access for certain bad actors. They can physically intervene in the live matching engine to protect the broader market.
And what if a VASP goes rogue?
Yep.
What if they suspect an exchange is lying on those daily deficit reports or hiding a commingling of customer funds?
The regulatory framework strips away the VASP's ability to stall.
Ow.
The rules explicitly grant VAR the power to demand immediate, unhindered access to all physical premises, all digital data, all corporate books, and all server records.
Wait, they don't have to wait for a court order.
They do not have to wait for a protracted court order. The legal right to audit is baked into the issuance of the license itself. They can literally walk into the corporate headquarters and demand the server logs on the spot.
That is formidable. But there is one specific enforcement mechanism regarding stablecoins that I found absolutely brilliant in the sources. It relates back to those reserve assets, the actual dollars backing the stablecoin in the traditional bank. Rule ID 5 in the FRVA rules requires VASPs to structure their legal agreements with those traditional banks in a very specific way.
Yes, this is perhaps the ultimate consumer protection failsafe. The VASP must structure their custodial agreements so that VARA is granted priority legal access to the reserve assets in the event of the VASP's failure.
Let me just translate the magnitude of that for a second. If the company that issues the stablecoin goes totally bankrupt, the regulator has pre-negotiated the legal right to step right over the corpse of the company, take direct control of the billions of dollars sitting in the traditional bank, and distribute those funds directly back to the retail token holders.
Exactly. They are not waiting for a multi-year bankruptcy proceeding in a foreign court to figure out who gets the scraps. VARA essentially mandates, if you crash this ship, we already possess the master keys to the lifeboats, and we will deploy them ourselves. It guarantees that the backing assets remain untouched by corporate creditors and can be swiftly returned to the public.
That brings an incredible sense of finality to this whole framework. Let's step back now and look at this massive blueprint we've unrolled today. We've navigated from the granular demands of UBO transparency and DAO bridges through the intensity of threat-led penetration testing all the way to the staggering capital requirements for stablecoins. Let's distill this into actionable takeaways for the specific groups of people listening to this deep dive right now. Let's start with the founders, the entrepreneurs who are currently deciding where to base their next major crypto platform.
For founders, the era of the scrappy, garage-based exchange is officially dead in Dubai. Setting up a VASP under VARI is an enterprise-grade endeavor. It requires massive upfront investment.
You can't just bootstrap it.
No, you must establish a physical corporate entity. You must recruit, relocate, and pay executive-level salaries for 2 full-time responsible individuals who hold UAE residency. You need millions of dollars in paid-up capital and even more in liquid assets and hot wallet insurance.
It's a heavy lift.
It is. You cannot launch a minimal viable product and figure out compliance later. The legal and technical compliance architecture must be fully operational and audited before you process your very first transaction.
So Dubai is no longer the destination for regulatory arbitrage. It's the destination for regulatory certainty.
Well said.
What about for the compliance officers, the MLROs listening?
For compliance professionals, this jurisdiction offers an incredibly high-stakes, high-demand environment. You are personally assessed as a fit and proper individual by the state. The reporting cadences are relentless quarterly board deep dives, constant transaction monitoring, and potentially daily deficit reporting.
And the unhosted wallet tracing.
Right. You are legally mandated to act as the border patrol for unhosted wallets, utilizing advanced blockchain tracing to reject tainted assets. The responsibility rests squarely on your shoulders.
And for the developers, the CTOs and the coders actually building the infrastructure.
The fundamental mantra of Web3 has historically been code is law. Under the VARA framework that has evolved, audited code is law.
Audited code.
You cannot push a smart contract to the live network without an independent third-party audit. You must engineer key management architectures with zero single points of failure. And, most importantly, you must build your systems with the constant awareness that the regulator might mandate a threat-led penetration test, unleashing elite red team hackers against your live operational environment. Your code cannot just be efficient. It must be an absolute fortress.
And finally, for the investors. For the retail consumers listening who just want a safe, reliable venue to trade and custody their digital wealth.
For the consumer, the VARA Rulebook represents one of the most comprehensive safety nets in the global financial system. The strict segregation of client assets, the mandate for one-to-one full reserve backing, the absolute ban on exchanges trading against their users, and the prohibition on rehypothecating your assets without explicit consent. All of these rules fundamentally alter the risk profile.
They really do.
If a VAR licensed exchange fails, your crypto does not become part of their bankruptcy estate. That alone represents a paradigm shift in how digital property rights are protected.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Dubai is making a monumental, highly calculated play to become the undisputed global capital of Web3. But they are attempting to achieve this by erecting the highest, most expensive regulatory barriers the industry has ever seen. They have essentially bridged the gap between the freewheeling world of decentralized tech and the draconian rigor of traditional high finance.
The tension lies in whether that bridge is just too expensive to cross.
Exactly. The question moving forward is this. Will these immense barriers to entry create a flight to quality? Will the market reward this rigor, causing all the best, most secure, most heavily funded platforms to flock to Dubai, establishing it as the absolute gold standard for institutional crypto?
That is clearly the strategic bet the regulators are making.
Right. Or will the sheer cost of this compliance, the resident executives, the continuous audits, the hundreds of millions in dead capital for stablecoin reserves, will that financial friction push the scrappy, truly disruptive startups out to looser jurisdictions? Are we witnessing the bifurcation of the crypto industry into two distinct worlds? The ultra-regulated institutional fortress of Dubai and the chaotic, unregulated frontiers everywhere else.
It is the ultimate regulatory tightrope. How much safety and resilience can you mandate before you inadvertently price out the exact innovation you are trying to cultivate?
It's a fascinating experiment playing out in real time. But what is undeniably clear from diving through these sources is that Dubai has made its choice. They are prioritizing systemic resilience, consumer protection, and institutional trust over unregulated speed. The era of move fast and break things is dead and buried in this jurisdiction. We have entered the era of move meticulously and build fortresses. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the VARA rulebooks. We encourage you to take this framework, keep these mechanics in mind, and use them as your own personal benchmark the next time you evaluate any platform you trust with your digital wealth. Keep asking the hard questions, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.